guarded, not trusting, always sensing the next problem is just around the corner. Maybe always feeling like your needs are too much, sometimes even for yourself. And if someone asked you, when did you start feeling this way? You would say, always. This is how I've always felt. But what if always actually is almost always, and it goes further back than you think? What if your nervous system learned something about safety and danger before you even had words, before you even have explicit memories? Welcome to this episode of the Biology of Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. And in this episode, I'm taking you back to the very beginning, from the first year of your life, all the way into adulthood, walking you through exactly how your body's trauma response got set into motion, what keeps it looping now, and why your nervous system may still be running our old rules that we wrote in our nervous system even before we could speak. Let's dive in. Early life experiences and how they shape who we are, but also our health, our attachment. I want to share with you so much of what gets missed for where our bodies are still holding those experiences. And I want to take you back to your earliest days when survival was actually quite fragile. When we are born, our nervous system is not able to take care of ourselves. We actually need touch or we die. And when babies are born, they actually don't realize that they are a separate being from their mother. That is how much they need what we will call co-regulation. And so babies have to be held in order for them to feel that life is safe. If we are not held enough, we come to believe that the world is dangerous, that I have to fight to survive. I can't rest. I can't relax. I have to fight to survive. And there are many reasons why we are not held enough. I can think of a few. One would be if you are born premature and you actually end up needing to go to the neonatal ICU or the NICU. And even though that is a life-saving measure for a baby, that is a life threat. I don't know if I'm going to survive. Where is my mom? Where is that nervous system that I need, that I know? That's the only thing that I know. Where did it go? And this is so overwhelming that people who are born premature, they tend to have lasting effects in their, not only their emotions, their relationships, and their physical health. That's how deep these early life experiences get embedded into our body. Now, of course, there are many other examples that we can think of. If you were born with the cord wrapped around your neck, would that not have been a life-threatening moment? And as a baby, we get overwhelmed with, I think I'm going to die. We can look at adoption. Adoption is another reason that is actually quite traumatic for a baby. My father was adopted. My father was adopted at birth. And his parents made the assumption that because they were adopting him at birth, he wouldn't remember, that he would not carry this trauma. And yet what we know is that that is not true. Does he have explicit memory? Like, can he remember actually being adopted? Of course not. But the body holds memory that's different than explicit memory. The body holds memories. And so as we look at what are the memories that our bodies are holding, might they be affecting us today? Might we have modes of protection where we are guarding our heart instead of opening our heart? Might we have other means in which we are trying to protect ourselves? Maybe we have coping mechanisms and we are protecting ourselves from emotions. And we don't like to feel lonely. We don't like to feel sad. We don't like to feel grief. And so we have strategies that we often don't even realize that we're doing because they've just become what we do. They've become our normal. They become a habit. But actually, it's so much deeper. They are the signs that our body is holding these memories and is still believing that the danger is there. And we are in protection mode rather than connection mode. So, going back to our early life, as we look at the attachment and trust cycle, we see how our body can be holding onto memories that say that the world is not safe. And so, as a child, as a baby, this is the first year of life. I'll be curious to see if you recognize that any of these elements still seem to persist in your life and relationships and your health today. As in the first year of life, we have innate mechanism built in for us to develop trust. If I have trust issues today, does this actually go back to my early life? What does that mean? So in the first year of life, we are taught to either trust or that we can't trust. And here's how that happens. A baby has a need. We had needs. We needed to be fed. We couldn't feed ourselves yet. We had a need to be rocked. We couldn't rock ourselves yet. We had a need to have our clothes changed, whether it was because it was too hot or too cold or because we had pooped and peed in our diaper. We can't change our clothes yet. We don't know how to use the restroom yet. We can't even get to the toilet yet. We're a baby. And so this is what I mean by this is the innate design of a life in its early years that has needs. And it has needs so that that baby can develop trust. How does it develop trust? Well, it communicates that it has a need. So there's discomfort, right? If I'm getting too hot as a baby, I'm going to start fussing. If I'm getting hungry, I'm going to start fussing. So it becomes uncomfortable and I'm going to communicate that I am becoming uncomfortable. But then this cool thing happens where my parent seems to know what I'm saying, even though I'm not talking and using words. My parent seems to know what I'm saying and comes into the rescue. And not only do they meet my need, but they meet my need with joy. They use that time to connect with me, to look in my eyes, to touch me, to help me feel like I'm special to them. They make me feel that I matter and that my needs are not a burden to them. And that is then how I develop implicit trust that my needs are going to be taken care of. I am going to be okay. I don't have to worry. I just need to communicate. And in this relationship, it is in relationship that I am safe. I am taken care of. I am loved. I am understood. I am heard. I am seen. This is where all of that starts in the first year of life. And so as people come in and they're reading my book and they're having questions about this is opening up a lot for me. And they're thinking, when did this first start? Like, I feel like I've always been this way. I've always felt like my needs were a burden to another person. Or they're saying that my needs feel like I can't have needs. I shouldn't have needs. I can't rely on other people. I can't trust other people to come through for me. I don't feel like I am seen. I don't feel like I'm understood. Don't feel loved. But I've always felt that way. So I just thought that this was who I really am. And I get to share with them that no, like this goes back. This is a reflection of your first year of life in this attachment and trust cycle. And when we think of how many needs we had as a baby, how many times a day were we getting fussy because we were uncomfortable about something? It wasn't just once a day. This was many, many times a day, which for a parent who is engaged and present and attuned with their baby, this is the biggest opportunity for them to keep showing up. I've got you. I see you. I hear you. And it's a joy to take care of you. It's a joy to just be with you. And in that opportunity, in that kind of relationship, we adapt and our nervous system adapts to being cherished, being in relationship that feels safe. But what happens if that wasn't our early life experience? What happens if instead of a parent consistently coming when we're calling, being able to give us not just the meeting of our needs, but the message that I enjoy taking care of your needs. This is a pleasure for me. This is an honor for me. If that wasn't what we experienced, then we come out of our first year of life feeling like I can't trust. I have to fight. I have to figure things out myself. I can't rely on others to meet my needs. It's not safe to have needs. It's better for me just to be independent. And so, how then does this translate into what we notice today? Again, becomes an opportunity for us to look at ourselves and to learn something deeper about ourselves. And for one, to realize that this is not just who I am, this is my adaptation to an early environment in which my needs were not consistently met with love. I adapted to that environment, to live in that environment, to survive in that environment. And I did survive. And now it's come at a cost. And so now we get to look at repair. How do we repair the cost so that we don't have to keep paying the cost? So the body has a trauma response. These are the 5 steps that the body takes to go into the trauma response. And it's helpful to know the details, the nuances, so that we can look back and see what really has been a trauma for me and what was just a stress for me. But we are going to start with, I would call this when we are calm, when we are alive, when we are connected, when we feel safe. Let's call it just feeling safe. And if we are a baby and we're in utero, we haven't been born yet. So we're in utero. I'm hoping that this is us most of the time. Though we do know that if mom is stressed, it's stressing baby out. If mom is exposed to toxins, to chemicals, like there's a chemical stress, baby is also stressed out. So we may not always actually be feeling safe in utero, but hopefully we are. Now, the birth process itself is a stress, is it not? Because You, as a baby, have always known this bath, this container that you're in. You don't know anything different. And change is a stress. Even if it's a good change, change is still a stress. And so we look at our stress response will come when any change starts to happen. Contractions start happening, or we have this idea of, again, like I've always been in this container and it's never shrunk on me, and all of a sudden now, like, things are imploding on me, things are caving in on me, there's pressure that I feel. So our nervous system is automatically going to be going into stress. What is this? What is going on? This is different. Something's happening, and we're going to have a stress response. But ideally, what happens then is that after that stress response, we are going to be able to come out and go right to mom, be able to lay on her chest, be able to feel her touch, hear her voice. And so we're going to return back to a sense of safety. And that's actually the first time that we really have this type of cycle that happens that helps us bond. It helps us bond when we experience stress. And then our mom is there and she lets us know, not with words, but with other ways of communication, that we're okay. And we start bonding with her as a result of this. Now, in a C-section, might this be different? Maybe. And a big part of it is, what is the benefit of going through the vaginal canal? Is there benefit in that, in the hormones, in the experience, in the process? I'm going to say yes, there is definite benefit for that process. And so losing out on that, it may not create the full bonding experience, and it may be more stress. It may feel like more stress to have mom going under anesthesia and the changes that happen in her body with anesthesia, because it's a very different environment that it creates for baby in utero. So a C-section may definitely change our inner experience and might have resulted in what we would call an overwhelm. An overwhelm is, once we cross this critical line, it's too much stress. And when it's too much stress, we cross over into overwhelm. And that's where we experience more of a breakdown, a shutdown, burnout if we're an adult. Yeah, it's all very fascinating to see, like, what might we have experienced in our early life that could have played a role in who we are today. So it's hard to know exactly how traumatic is a C-section, because there's a lot that can go into that, but it definitely is a disruption of the normal process, which is designed to facilitate the most healthy bonding from the moment that a baby is born. And bonding is where we feel safe as a baby. And we will do anything as a baby to maintain our bonding and attachment with someone, because we know that we would die without them. And so we call this the attachment versus authenticity tension. And some children need to lose themselves in order to maintain their attachment with their parent. So they abandon themselves, they abandon who they really are, and they try to become something else that their parent wants them to be. Or if their parent, has some mood challenges, maybe their parent is depressed, we will see that child adapt to that and try to become the one that makes their parent happy. Or if the parent is an alcoholic, we will see that child take on the responsibility of stopping the alcohol use. blaming it on themselves. If I were only better, if I were only getting better grades, if I were only this, if I were only pretty, if I were only smart, if I were only this, then they wouldn't do that, or they wouldn't be that way, or they wouldn't talk to me like that. Of course, that's not true, but that's not how it registers in a child. And so this is where we can see a lot of trauma starts to be stored in our bodies, even as young children, as we try to become what we think our parents need or want us to be. We abandon ourselves in order to maintain that attachment. And as I look at it, the body's trauma response can happen at any point. And a trauma response will happen for any reason that at that time in our life overwhelms us. And the earlier then that we experience overwhelm, the more it sets us up to continue to experience overwhelm. And so we look at people who are at higher risk even for depression, for anxiety, for PTSD, for all of your chronic health conditions, weight gain, autoimmunity, the chronic health issues. All of those are an outpouring of the nervous system dysregulation that happens with stored trauma. And the earlier that started happening, the more risk that we have. Sometimes that means that the earlier that we will start to have these issues. Sometimes that means the more severe those symptoms or issues will be. So the earlier that we start having these experiences of overwhelm, the more it sets us up to just experience more of those and more of the same and more. And so then we get to the point where our nervous system or our inner state is just looping between stress and overwhelm all the time. We're never actually feeling safe. We're always either stressed and that high energy, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do? Or in overwhelm and on the couch and binge watching movies with a tub of ice cream. We don't always look like that when we're in overwhelm, but the idea of that overwhelm is just like we're in low energy. We've almost shifted gears into I can't do this anymore. And the earlier that we start looping between those two survival states, the more of that biology of trauma that it creates. And so the sooner and the more issues we will see as a result of that. But it is possible to have had a relatively safe and stable and healthy relationship in our early life, and then other experiences put us into overwhelm. Yeah. So this idea then is, well, then how? How does the body keep score? It's because something is being stored, and what's really being stored is the ongoing perception of danger. And if I have an ongoing background sense of danger, I'm always waiting for the next shoe to drop. I'm always knowing that the next problem is just around the corner. I know that I can never really relax because I've got to stay on guard. There's always danger. And so it's really stored in our nervous system, which is the system that we have that senses whether we are safe or whether we are in danger. So if you think of it, I think of it like a dashboard of a car. If we have a dashboard of a car, that's my nervous system, and it's constantly scanning the environment. It's constantly gathering information. So it's gathering information from my tire pressure, my oil level, my gas tank. It's constantly measuring all of these parameters. It's also measuring the road conditions. It's also measuring my capacity for like the transmission and how long has it been since it's had some maintenance. So it's measuring all of this simultaneously. And at every moment, it's then telling me, based on the information that we're getting, you're in a lot of danger, you're in a little danger, or you're in no danger at all. That's the same thing with our nervous system. Those are the three states that we have. We're in a lot of danger, we are in a little danger, or we're in no danger at all. And so how it then gets stored, how does trauma get stored? It gets stored in this dashboard that tells us that there's always danger, even if it's not true. Our life can be relatively good. And yet our nervous system is going to say, no, no, we don't think so. We should stay in stress mode because we can sense that there is still danger. So this was actually a big, this was the big questions that I had back in 2014 when I was significantly overweight, not able to lose weight on the diets that I was trying. I was on 2 mood medications for anxiety and depression, and then got diagnosed with a chronic fatigue and autoimmunity. And I'm like, something tells me that this isn't just a health issue. Something tells me that this is deeper. Something tells me that even though I don't think that I've had trauma, my body seems to be holding onto trauma because these are the health conditions that are associated with stored trauma. So how would we know? I think of what I laid out in chapter 9, which are the patterns of trauma. And this is really helpful because this is how I identified that even though I didn't think that I had trauma, my body was holding trauma. I had the patterns of chronic trauma. Now, these patterns come from the survival mechanisms that we will experience, that our body will engage when it has an acute trauma response. And those strategies are involving very different than stress. We'll go over that in a moment. But they are ones that are kind of shutting things down because it's like we've blown the circuit. And when we blow the circuit in our house, the lights turn off, like all the electricity turns off because too much came through and it put a risk at the electrical circuit. And so it just short circuited the whole thing. That's what happens in a trauma response. It's like short circuiting our body because it just all of a sudden became way too much for us. And so as we look at those survival mechanisms and that short circuiting, do we see elements of that in our life today? Do we see patterns of pain? Meaning, is my body carrying unresolved inner pain that it still hasn't processed? It still hasn't resolved. It still hasn't healed. That is going to be stored trauma. Why? Because stress does not make our body hold on to anything. Stress is a temporary state. And when we are in stress, we have 2 options coming out of stress: either return to safety or escalate into this overwhelm because it was too much or too long. And so in that scenario, if we notice that we still have inner emotional pain or memories that feel unresolved, that's all that we need to know to see that my body's holding on to the past because at that time it was overwhelming and I wasn't able to process and feel and resolve it at that time. The difference between stress and trauma, I'm going to go back to these steps that our body takes in order to get into trauma because it's very clear from the physiology that our body does go through stress to get into the trauma response, but they are 2 different states. And they are separated by this critical line of overwhelm. And so as we notice that there is some kind of danger, problem, threat, then our body will always have a stress response. That will always happen first. And that's because the sympathetic nervous system, it gets activated and it says, we need to respond. There's a problem and we need to respond. That is the stress response, a high energy state in order to respond and take action. But once we realize that there's nothing that we can do or that our best was not good enough,
Mm.
we're going to feel the drop of our energy. We're going to feel the heaviness. We're going to feel shame. We're going to feel what some people might think is actual depression. And in actuality, it's our nervous system going into this place of, I can't care what happens because I don't have the energy to care. I can't care because there's nothing I can do about it. And so that's the difference between stress and the trauma physiology. In the stress response, we still believe that there is something that we can do, and we are going to do it. And our body is giving us the energy to do it. But in the trauma response, our state is now one of, I can't do it. I can't do this.
Mm.
And there's a low energy instead of the high energy of stress. When we are in stress, we will notice that we have the thought that I can still figure this out. I can still overcome this. I'm going to try. I'm going to give it my best. And then that trauma place is where we've given it our best and it didn't work. So now we look at stored trauma is actually a big source of stress for us. That stored trauma will create stress. And this is where I talk about that loop where we spend our days looping between stress and overwhelm, stress and overwhelm. And that's really damaging to our health. And that's what will make it very hard to lose weight. It will make it very hard to be healthy. It will be very hard to sleep well because your body's never in the other state that it needs to actually recover and rest and feel safe.
Mhm.
And so stored trauma is the biggest source of stress in our life.
Mm.
And we often won't recognize it. And so going back to the body's trauma response here, the stress response is anxiety.
Mm.
The trauma response is depression.
Mm.
And that's why most people will have elements of both because they're actually looping between both of these survival states, unable to get out of the loop.
Mm.
And when they're in stress, they'll feel anxiety. When they're in overwhelm and the trauma response, they'll feel the depression. Going back to the body trauma response, cortisol is going to be released for the stress response. So cortisol is a stress hormone, but what's actually driving cortisol is the adrenaline. Cortisol doesn't act on its own. Cortisol has a natural rhythm, and cortisol helps us wake up in the morning. If we didn't have cortisol, we wouldn't be able to wake up in the morning. So it's what gives us a sense of alertness, aliveness. And so there is a natural rhythm for our cortisol, and we want to align with that rhythm, which would suggest that we should experience some stress in our morning, which is interesting. Are we allowing ourselves to have a stress response in the morning and get something done, accomplish something big, meet a challenge, overcome an obstacle in our life? The best time for that is in the morning when our stress response is, when our cortisol is at its natural peak. But when we are in a true threat problem outside of that natural cortisol cycle, adrenaline is going to be released. Adrenaline is really the true stress hormone. And so as adrenaline is released to give us a very fast response to something, it's what then increases cortisol. And it increases cortisol because cortisol is actually going to buffer and protect us from some of the adrenaline's effects, which can be quite damaging. So all of this activation here that we see, this line shows us that this is our energy level increasing. So as our energy level goes up, that's because of adrenaline. Adrenaline is going to be released in proportion to the size of the problem that we see, not based on reality. It's based on the size of the problem that we see.
Mm.
And as a result, we will experience different degrees of adrenaline based on the different size of problem that we see in our life at that moment. And whatever the degree of adrenaline, it's going to increase the cortisol by the same percentage because cortisol buffers adrenaline. So adrenaline is something that without that buffer of cortisol, it actually is going to damage our tissues. It actually causes the brain immune cells to unleash a large amount of inflammation, which can then result in dementia long term. It can result in the brain fog, the decision fatigue. So the adrenaline is quite strong. It's quite powerful. It's like using Drano to clear out your tubes in your sink. You want something strong, and it's also toxic at high levels because it's so strong. And so that's why cortisol, actually, the purpose of cortisol in our stress response is to buffer and protect us from these effects, the toxic effects of adrenaline. So if we have high cortisol, what we actually want to be doing is be decreasing our adrenaline rather than trying to just decrease our cortisol. We need to go to what is the reason for the high cortisol. And it's always going to be adrenaline that's driving our cortisol. Yeah, what I see is that trauma is part of the human experience. It's not anything bad. It's not anything that we need to be ashamed of. And it's part of being human in a world that's toxic. And we see things that can be overwhelming to us. We can, not only experience bad things ourselves, but sometimes just witnessing bad things happening to another person, and we can't make it stop. That then puts our own bodies into a trauma response, into overwhelm. And given what we are exposed to on a daily basis from the news, from TV, from social media, we are now witnessing bad things happening to other people all the time. How do we manage that exposure? How do we not get overwhelmed by that? Especially when we're just sitting in our homes and have no way to actually do something. Again, that's when we go into the overwhelm and the trauma biology that will make us sick. It's not being able to do something. If we can do something, well, then that's stress. And stress is not what makes us sick. It's when we've crossed into overwhelm that it makes us sick. And we cross into overwhelm when we can't make the bad things stop. And that's so much of life. What we covered goes back further than most people think to look. And if you recognize yourself in that attachment and trust cycle, you will want to dive deeper in chapter 11 of the book, The Biology of Trauma, the chapter where I go over how attachment becomes the lens through which we see the world. I will also drop a guide, a free guide that I've created in the show notes. It's the Attachment Trauma Roadmap. Shows you how your nervous system affects your ability to feel safe in relationships now and where to begin on the healing journey. Finally, if this episode resonated with you, would you please drop a review sharing one thing that you learned? It helps more people find this information, and someone out there right now is searching for exactly what you just learned. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. Until next episode, lots of love.